Happy Father's Day. In honor of Father's Day, I'd like to share with you two stories. One about my father and a second story. My father, Morris Whitman of blessed memory, was born in Framingham, which is a suburb of Boston. He met and married my mother, and they settled in Memphis, Tennessee, where my mother is from, and where I was born and raised. So I was very close with my mother's parents. We all lived in Memphis. But I only occasionally saw my father's parents. His parents were older. They were European. He was the youngest sibling. We would usually go to Boston to visit for Thanksgiving. When my father's father died, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And I remember just before Shabbos, my father got word that his father had a stroke. It was winter. And I remember walking to shul with my father that Friday night in Memphis. And I remember how unusually and unnaturally quiet he was. And I sensed, though I could not have verbalized it, how his father's health weighed on him. After Shabbos, my father learned that his father had passed away, and we flew to Boston for the funeral and for Shiva. My father was close with a rabbi in Memphis, Rabbi Ephraim Greenblatt, of blessed memory, a world-renowned expert in Jewish law and a wonderful tzaddik. My father supported him, studied with him, respected him, and taught us to respect him. Rabbi Greenblatt was my teacher for many years and remained my Rebbe, my mentor, for the rest of his life. I have a very vivid memory at the Memphis airport waiting for our flight to Boston. And I can see now in my mind's eye my father standing at a payphone near the gate at the airport speaking to Rabbi Greenblatt. He was asking him various questions about Jewish law and practice to guide him on my father's first journey on losing a parent. And I didn't realize it till many years later. But what I took from that memory, what I take from that memory, is the realization that my father wanted to do it right. And so he asked, and he did it right. And that's what I remember about my father from when I was very young. He wanted to do it right. And he wanted us, his children, to do it right. Allow me to share a second story. This is not about my father. It's not even about a father. But it's about someone who was like a father and their impact, which was only recognized many years later. And this story is told by Rabbi Gerald Wolpe, who was a congregational rabbi in Philadelphia for many years. He passed away in 2013. When he was a boy, 11 years old, his father passed away. His mother was a widow at the age of 34. Gerald, at that time just Gerald, was an only child, and he bore much of the grief alone. So, in accordance with traditional practice, Gerald would walk to shul every morning in order to be able to say Kaddish for the entire 11 months after his father's passing. At the end of his first week walking to shul every morning, he noticed that as he left his house, he saw the gabbai of his shul, Mr. Einstein, who walked past his home just as Gerald walked out. Mr. Einstein was an elderly gentleman, and he said to this young boy, Gerald, 11-year-old Gerald, he said, "Your home is on my way to the synagogue, and I thought it might be fun to have some company, and that way I don't have to walk alone. So why don't we walk together?" Gerald and Mr. Einstein walked together every morning to shul for 11 months. They talked about life and loss, and for those moments, Gerald was not so alone. After Gerald married and had his first child, now Rabbi Wolpe, he called Mr. Einstein, now well into his 90s, and he asked if he could bring his wife and newly born child to meet. And Mr. Einstein agreed, but said that because of his age and it was difficult for him to get out, he needed to ask that Gerald come to him. And he agreed. And Gerald wrote these words. Rabbi Wolpe wrote these words. "The journey was long and complicated. His home by car was a full 20 minutes away. I drove in tears as I realized what he had done all those years ago. He had walked for an hour to my home so that I would not have to walk alone every morning to shul. By the simplest of gestures, the act of caring, he took a frightened child and led him with confidence and with faith back into life." So often our fathers and those who act towards us like fathers do so much for us that we don't even realize. Sometimes we only realize it years or decades later, often after we become fathers and see how much we do for our children that they do not realize. I hope your Father's Day is a happy one this day. I hope you will join me in spending some time today thinking about what your Father did for you, as I think about what my Father did for me, that I have not yet fully appreciated. Happy Father's Day.